Just go to ecoamerica.org to register and attend the online ceremony. That's ecoamerica.org. Don't miss the presentation of the American Climate Leadership Awards 2025, Wednesday, April 16th, and wish us luck. Caring about the climate, caring about the community, changing the conversation. We're KBLA Talk 1580, and we've got your black.
KBLA Talk 1580. It is time for Freedman Friday. We do this every week around this time. I'll talk about reparations in a comprehensive way. It's meant to make sure we're educated up on what's happening, encouraged, inspired, and part of the momentum rather than the naysayers, haters, and ignorant folks. Really pleased to welcome in a new voice, William M. Van Cleve, professor of the School of Law, professor of Organizational Behavior and Leadership at the Olin Business School, Washington University in St. Louis. She holds a dual appointment as a professor in the School of Law and professor of Organizational Behavior. She also holds appointments in the departments of African and African American Studies, History, Sociology, Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies in the College of Arts and Sciences. Professor Adrienne Davis, welcome.
Thank you. It's my absolute pleasure and honor to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you in. It's such a big topic, and I try to go to the macro and the micro because I feel like we are still getting an understanding of what reparations is. You speak of it as a social movement.
Yes, yeah. It's it is certainly a set of demands and requests that Black folks and our allies and people who are fighting for the anti-racism struggle, trying to fight against white supremacy. But I also really want to highlight it as a social movement and something that long predates the civil rights movement.
Well, that's a great way to start. Explain what you mean by long predates the civil rights movement.
Starts early in the 20th century with many of the folks who we now think of as the luminaries of that time. But arguably the first calls for reparations, that come in a public way, come from David Walker, the Black abolitionist, who in 1830 issued a famous appeal calling for the end of slavery, but also calling for compensation. Sojourner Truth, who is well known by many, for her famous proclamation of "Aren't I a woman too?" Also is less known as someone who was a reparations advocate who said, the federal government needs to redistribute resources, not only as compensation for past abuses, but also as a prerequisite for any kind of sovereignty and self-determination that Black folks are going to be able to have going forward in the future. So that predates the long civil rights movement by, almost a century.
Yeah.
People think that it's kind of this new radical claim or this, post-1960s, 1970s claim. But Black folks understood that they were entitled to repair in economic and financial terms well before the civil rights movement. So I'd like to think of them as parallel traditions in the fight for Black justice.
Do you include Callie House in that early reparations cohort?
Oh, absolutely. So Callie House, so for folks who are looking for a good read, Mary Frances. Well, so of course, there's my law review article. I should give a plug for that that I published. But if you really want, my article I think is great, but it might put you to sleep. If you want a really
Not
great
us.
read,
We're fascinated by all things reparations.
So Mary Frances Berry, a Black historian, luminary, wrote a beautiful book called My Face is Black, It's True, about Callie House and the movement for reparations. So that was the late 19th century. So that's about 50 years after David Walker and Sojourner Truth. And Callie House was herself an emancipated, formerly enslaved person who formed an organization called the National Ex-Slave Mutual Relief Bounty and Pension Association in 1897, and her focus was on securing pensions for Black Americans. You know, that we don't. So often we think about. I think that as Black folks and everybody, you know, kind of we buy into this notion that, you know, Black people were property under slavery, right? Mm-hmm. And we begin to internalize that view ourselves in some ways, right? And we forget that the enslaved Black people were people and were workers. And as the radical, beautiful mind Angela Davis says, this was an enslaved captive workforce. And so, you know, what Callie House pointed out is, you know, so now that we have liberated this captive workforce, you know, hundreds and thousands of Black folks, they are suffering from immense debility, you know, from the injuries of the physical work. They have been working their entire lives without having been able to save money, without having had any wages. They are now, many of them, too old to care for themselves. They're now being subject to structural discrimination in terms of being able to go out and earn a living. So, you know, slavery has been is transformed now into Jim Crow. So there's this call for pensions for the formerly enslaved people, and specifically, she called for $500 lump sum payments and then $15 a month to all of the formerly enslaved people. And she was really, this is important, she said, this is not charity, right? Because so often whenever Black people make appeals to the government, people say, oh, you're asking for charity, you're asking for handouts, you're asking for welfare. No, she said, this is not charity, this is compensation. And that's at the heart and the root, right, of what reparations is. It's compensation, and specifically compensation rooted in moral repair, moral wrongs that were done. So she led a long-standing, for 20-year effort for these ex-slave, as she called them, pensions. The federal government did not like it. The state governments did not like it. The U.S. Post Office, the Department of Justice prosecuted her, even though, you know, what she was doing was protected speech. They prosecuted her, they convicted her, they imprisoned her, you know, so this is also part of a long tradition of persecuting Black folks for speaking up. So Callie House is probably, you know, best known as the first person who successfully organized, or didn't successfully, but it was organizing for Black reparations, but was predated in terms of calling for it by David Walker and Sojourner Truth.
Yeah, and definitely interesting that they criminalized her, and actually she ended up doing some time, right?
She did. She spent a year in prison with the radical Emma Goldman. I think they may have even been cellmates. Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. There's a movie right there.
I know, right? Right, or an opera.
Right. Yeah, definitely an opera. I'm writing it right now. Professor Adrienne Davis is our guest. And, you know, I'm so happy to have your brain in this conversation. I know you've written a lot about the historic and modern social movements for reparations. In fact, that's the name of your article, Wash U Laws, where you could find it, or just Google it. And, you know, there's this constant argument about the legal sustainability of any approach to reparations through the courts, through legislative, through the private sector. So I want to look a little bit at that and how you see the movement now as someone who has studied it over the entire course of its trajectory. We'll look at that and more when we come forward. It's the Freedman Friday around here, KBLA Talk 1580.
She's reclaiming her time on KBLA Talk 1580. More First Things First with Dominique DiPrima when we come forward. Before the fire, Altadena was a real-life Wakanda, a thriving black oasis just 50 miles from downtown Los Angeles. 80% black residents were homeowners, building intergenerational wealth against the odds. It was a hub of black-owned businesses, churches, and cultural institutions. It stood as a symbol of black resilience and economic independence. Then, in a matter of hours, it was gone. The fire tore through homes, swallowed businesses, and left behind a painful void. But was it just an unstoppable act of nature, or was negligence involved? Did officials ignore early warning signs? Were the response efforts delayed or insufficient? What role, if any, did corporate or government failures play? Survivors are demanding answers. Don't miss our KBLA Talk 1580 Town Hall. The Eden Altadena Fire, 100 days and counting, on Wednesday, April 16th, 4 to 6 p.m. at the Robinson Park Recreation Center, 1081 North Fair Oaks in Pasadena. Join Dominique DiPrima, Nee Cordelai Corte, James Farr, Tavis Smiley, and a panel of survivors, community leaders, and experts as we commemorate Day 100 since the wildfires flared up. And we discuss where we go from here. It's KBLA's Eden Altadena Fire, 100 Days and Counting Town Hall, Wednesday, April 16th, 4 to 6 p.m. at the Robinson Park Recreation Center in Pasadena. Light refreshments to follow. Admission is free, but sign-up is required at our KBLA1580.com website. This is a community call to action, brought to you by KBLA Talk 1580 and Quinn Emanuel Trial Lawyers. At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your black.
Texting privacy policy and terms and conditions posted at textplan.us. Texting enrolls for recurring automated text marketing messages. Message and data rates may apply or stop, opt out. Individual results may vary. Consult a doctor prior to use.
If you've struggled to lose weight in the past, this important message is for you because you could lose as much as 50 pounds or more with Zelfie. Zelfie makes it easy and affordable to get weight loss treatment 100% online. Zelfie providers can prescribe FDA-approved GLP-1 weight loss medications clinically shown to help people lose weight like Wegovy, Zepbound, and others. Plus, help get the medication covered by insurance so it's as little as $0 a month.
The doctors are super helpful, and the meds have been a game changer. It's the first program I've had success with.
Before Zelfie, I was unable to lose weight, even though I was eating healthy and exercising 6 days a week. Zelfie helped me not only lose weight, but I feel so much better.
Text GOAL to 200-300 to get started today with Zelfie and see if weight loss medications like Wegovy or Zepbound are right for you. Don't wait. Text now for a link to your exclusive offer. Text GOAL to 200-300. That's GOAL to 200-300. GOAL to 200-300.
The conversation continues right now with Dominique DiPrima on First Things First.
Professor Adrienne Davis, is our guest for Freedman Friday. We're talking reparations, and she teaches in School of Law as well as organizational behavior and leadership, which is really interesting when it comes to reparations. And you've been intentional about talking about it in a different frame, not just is this legal, is that legal, can this pass muster, does this stand a chance, but looking at it as a social movement, both historically and right now, today. Talk about why that's important.
Yeah, thank you for that question. You know, so much of the focus on Black life and the struggle for Black equality is on civil rights, and I'm a big fan of civil rights. I wouldn't be here sitting here in my nice bar stool, if a lot of people had fought for my civil rights. But what reparations, so civil rights focuses on anti-discrimination and Black equality, right? Then reparations focuses on compensation, repair, and really naming past abuses. Right. And I think that part of what we look at when we see social movements is how it helps people develop what we call oppositional consciousness. Right. So how is it that people come to see the world in which they grow up as unjust? Right. And so part of what the reparations movement has done, I think it reveals in kind of really interesting ways, I think, some embedded tensions. So one is like competing visions of what Black liberation looks like, right? So does Black liberation look like integration, having the same rights as white folks, being able to sit at lunch counters, all of which, go to the same schools, all of which is incredibly, incredibly important? Or this black justice, black freedom also look like self-determination, right? And you get, I think, really different views when you talk to civil rights activists versus reparations activists about what the goal is. And also in terms of social movements, it really exposes, it's kind of closing now, but it exposes some of the class tensions within the Black community, right? So until very recently, the folks who were calling for reparations were the Black working class, the Black poor, but not the Black upper class and the Black elites. In fact, the Black upper class and elites tended to distance themselves, from reparations.
Yeah.
So that's something that the rowdy crowd, wants. Like we're not asking for that. We're just asking for a seat at your table, right? A seat at the white table, but we're not asking for anything, any kind of, handouts or reparations. So it kind of, I think, also really reveals some intriguing class tensions within the Black community, and we can ask ourselves, why is it that working class Black folks and poor Black folks were more willing to make that set of demands until recently than elite Black folks. So in terms of what is that oppositional consciousness, the fact that working class and poor Black folks were willing to make that set of demands on the state and didn't see their future of Black freedom as linked to a seat at the white table in the way that Black elites did. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. To be honest with you, Professor, I think, although we have seen some movement of Black elites, I think that class fissure is still there. I still see reparations being something that is more passionately and widespread among as a goal among working class and low income Black people compared to what you'll call the elite or the upper classes of Black folks.
I think that is true, but it has been over. So I would say that 2020, just right around 2020, I should write an article called 2020 Black Reparations.
Yeah.
Because right around 2020, you see a marked shift, right? And it's even, some of it happens in 2019, because I don't want us to automatically jump and link it to the murder of George Floyd, right? So some of it's predating that. But right around 2019, 2020, you start to see reparations be institutionalized.
Right.
Call for reparations to be institutionalized. So it moves from, a social movement to actually being institutionalized. And by that, I mean, you see cities, municipalities, states, private institutions like J.P. Morgan Chase Bank. You see there's a group of nuns. You see all of these different groups begin to say, we're going to start to seriously tackle and maybe even implement reparations, right? And so at that moment, I think that once it's becoming institutionalized, I do think it draws more of the Black upper class in because it becomes somewhat safer. So, for instance, here in
you
St.
say
Louis,
because it became safer? Interesting.
Well, yeah, I shouldn't. Look, I shouldn't put. I'm firmly a member of the Black upper class. I don't mean to put down my folks, but I think here's what I would say. So once universities like Georgetown begin to say we want to study Black reparations, then of course the Black elite wants to be at that table in that discussion.
Mm-hmm. Right. Not only that, I mean, you've got city commissions, state commissions. So now there are positions where you're more likely to place someone who has those connections and that kind of perceived clout, right?
Right. And so locally, and I want to please remind me to pivot back to Evanston, which was the first city to really tackle reparations, I'd say, in a serious way, and ultimately ended up implementing reparations. So here in St. Louis, we have a Black woman mayor, Tashara Jones.
Yeah, they love attacking y'all's mayor, just like they love attacking our mayor.
Oh my word! Have you done a session on misogynoir? Do I need to come back and do?
You need to come back. You definitely need to come back because from our mayor to yours, shut it down.
Yeah. So for people who don't know, misogynoir is the specific hatred of Black women and how it gets replicated in the media. And my goodness, they keep coming after my mayor, and she is my heart. She is fantastic. So I could do a whole show on her and everything that she's done.
I'd love to do it.
She appointed a reparations commission And to your point, it's led by a good friend of mine who is the dean in the Washington University Medical School, Dr. Will Ross. And he is, not only a pillar of our community, but also a radical thinker, right? And so appointing him as the chair of this commission really gave him a platform. He convened. It's a beautiful commission. They've wrapped up their work now. It included activists and it included professionals. So I thought it was just a beautiful representation. Because St. Louis is overwhelmingly a Black city, right? And it includes Black professionals, it includes Black activists, it includes a lot of Black poor people. So all of those folks I think were represented beautifully on that commission. So I do feel like once it became institutionalized, it became more attractive to the Black upper class. And because now the governments and these institutions, if J.P. Morgan Chase says, we're going to think about what we owe in terms of racial repair. That's something that's going to be attractive to a lot of Black upper class people to think through. So in Georgetown, though, so just in terms of this being a social movement and how this is no longer just a social movement for Black people, okay? So I think one of the pivotal moments to me was 2019 when Georgetown University announced that they were going to do an internal study of their role in selling a number of folks that the university had enslaved, and what it meant when they again, when we don't think about enslaved people as people because we internalize this view of property, but enslaved people were people with families and children, and they had attachments to communities, they had churches, they had associations. So when Georgetown decided to sell off these 400 people, they broke up that community, they shattered that community, right? So Georgetown decided to do a study, and in 2019, the Georgetown University students voted to impose on themselves a student fee to help fund reparations. Okay, now, I haven't gone and looked at the percentage of Georgetown undergrads that are Black people, but I know it is not a majority. I know
yeah,
it is
that's
not a
true,
majority.
right?
Right. So this would be overwhelmingly non-Black people, non-Black students who felt so strongly about Georgetown's moral obligation to pay reparations that they voted to impose a fee on themselves. So to me, that's a pivotal moment, right? And at that moment, the movement can declare some success because it has now developed, it has cultivated oppositional consciousness, not only among Black folks who are kind of predisposed to have oppositional consciousness, but it has begun to reach white folks and Asian folks and Latino folks, all the folks who would comprise that undergraduate student population. Now, ultimately, Georgetown said, if we're going to fund reparations, we don't need your money. You students, you don't have to impose the fee on yourselves. But from a social movement's perspective, that is a crucial moment, right?
Yeah, that's a very crucial moment. And it's a really interesting point because all of this so-called polling is always saying white folks do not support reparations, especially if it's going to cost them any money. And when you're talking about Georgetown, you're talking about some of your brainiac white young people. It makes me wonder if there is a generational divide among white people and how they view reparations.
I think that's a great question, Dominique. And, I think we see a generational divide among white people in terms of how they see racism and white supremacy more generally, right? In law school, and I appreciate, law students, like you said, are, not only brainiacs, but typically have a predisposition to think about justice and due process and, may be more offended by injustice than your average American. But I now find that some of the most radically anti-racist students I have are white students. And I've been teaching for 35 years, and that was not the case 35 years ago or even 10 years ago. 10 years ago, people were like, well, of course, racism is bad, right? But now, the people who are just, completely intolerant are frequently the white students. I mean, the Black students continue to be, anti-racist, obviously leading a charge. But I have seen a radical shift in this younger generation of white folks. And George Floyd for them, again, when we think about social movements, right? George Floyd for them just became a flashpoint, right? And I think for so many of them, they decided, I'm not going to be, my parents' racism is not my racism. I'm going to reject this. This is not how I'm going to live my life. I'm going to begin to name the privileges that I have. I'm going to begin to articulate them. I'm going to name the privileges that my family has. And it's just a completely different moment. So I think it is a natural extension of that kind of radicalization of a lot of younger white folks post George, with George Floyd's murder. And, it began with Michael Brown, but, really Michael Brown's murder in St. Louis, but really we know the flashpoint was in 2020. And I think that has, again, opened so many of them up to, to really thinking radically about, if we're now sitting on a few hundred years, centuries of white supremacy, I think they're more open to radical ways of disrupting that.
Well, and my editorial here is precisely why the current administration is going after universities in the way that it is, and going after the Smithsonian and going after Black history in the way that it is, because they are watching their own children grow to understand the history of this country, the history of the world, and the realities of racism and impact, and they want to make sure that that's disrupted, so the next generations do not continue this trend of consciousness. So, hopefully they won't be successful. I doubt that, because what I know of young people as a mother of one is that the more you tell them not to read a book, the more they're going to read it. The more you tell them not to think, see, do, or explore a thing, the more they're going to think, see, and explore about that thing. Philip Blair says, don't forget about Elijah McClain. Elijah McClain was part of that. Yeah, there are so many, sadly. Usually at least 1,000 Americans a year are slain by police, but only certain ones impact us the way that they should. We'll continue this conversation with Professor Adrienne Davis. We're talking reparations, of course. It's a Freedman Friday on KBLA Talk 1580.
The station you turn to when you've had it up to here with cultural incompetence. KBLA Talk 1580.
I'm Bree Wood with 4 things you should know with BIN News. At the 2025 Black Press Day in Washington, D.C., President and CEO Benjamin Chavez highlighted the Black press's role in advocating for freedom and equality. He called for adapting to new platforms while preserving print journalism's impact. The NYPD is searching for suspects who vandalized a Tesla with swastikas and the word Nazis in Brooklyn. The car's cameras captured the incident, and police are investigating the hate crime. Tesla vehicles have been a target in a number of other states as well as of late. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is in the Philippines, where he reaffirmed the U.S.'s commitment to help defend against threats, including China. He met today with Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. as the pair stressed a commitment to peace in the region. And a new study from China links high-salt diets to depression-like behavior in mice, showing that excessive salt intake triggers immune responses in the brain, leading to depression-like symptoms. Get BIN News on demand 24/7 on the iHeartRadio app.
The Crohn's and Colitis Foundation has been at the forefront of inflammatory bowel disease research and care for over 50 years. Learn more about research, education, and support at Crohn'sColitisFoundation.org.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Lakers were victimized by perhaps the most amazing comeback this season in the NBA. Josh Giddey hit a three-pointer from just inside the half-court line Thursday night to lift the Chicago Bulls to a 119-117 victory. Giddey's game winner was one of 3 three-point shots made by the Bulls in the final 10 seconds. The Lakers led by 5 with 12.6 seconds left. The painful loss ruined a great performance by Austin Reeves. He had a game-high 30 points. The Lakers are 4-8 in their last 12 games. They're at Memphis tomorrow. The Clippers, 8-2 in their last 10, are at Brooklyn tonight. The Dodgers beat Detroit 5-4 in their home opener Thursday. The Dodgers got home runs from DH Shohei Ohtani, right fielder Teoscar Hernandez, and center fielder Tommy Edman. The Angels got off to a bad start last night with an 8-1 loss in Chicago to the White Sox. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson on KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580. Talk radio. That's music to your ears. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
Need a ride? Ride in style. Choose K-Meets, luxury transportation that puts you first. K-Meets has you covered with our 6-seater Sprinter limo that's perfect for couples, proms, weddings, and events. Whether it's a night out, special event, or just because, our elite Sprinter offers the perfect blend of luxury and intimacy without the crowd. Looking for SUV? K-Meets has that too. Elite SUV service available for your next ride. Book at kmeblack.com or call today 424-500-4751. Again, kmeblack.com 424-500-4751.
At Exquisite Family Mortuary, we know how overwhelming it can be planning a meaningful farewell for your loved one. Secure your peace of mind by calling Charlotte White at 323-577-5562. That's Charlotte White at 323-577-5562. From traditional funeral services to memorials to direct cremation, pre-needs, and more. Call Charlotte White at Exquisite Family Mortuary for Southern hospitality in Southern California. That's Charlotte White at 323-577-5562. Exquisite Family Mortuary is located nearby in Inglewood, California. Exquisite Family Mortuary, where your loved one becomes our loved one. Stories are power. The Black Land Lost Narrative Archive Project is an effort to collect, preserve, and amplify stories of Black land loss. It will form an invaluable resource for scholars, authors, historians, educators, storytellers, policymakers, and change agents who wrestle with issues of restitution, reparations, racial inequality in home ownership, and the racial wealth gap. Through documenting stories of Black land loss, the archive will help demonstrate the magnitude of what Black families have lost and will continue the national dialogue to encourage paths to restitution, rebuilding, and healing. Support the Black Land Lost Narrative Archive Project by visiting www.blacklandlost.org or by donating at www.blacklandlost.org/donate. Spread the word to inspire awareness, activism, leadership, and change. And join us in making a lasting impact. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black. Heard any other talk radio lately that sounds anything like this? We didn't think so. You're listening to Unapologetically Progressive, KBLA Talk 1580.
And I'm glad you're here. We do this every Friday around this time. Also looking forward to the conversation next hour with Margaret Prescott. We're going to be talking about the Grim Sleeper and the very grim anniversary this weekend. Right now, though, we are talking with Professor of Law and Organizational Behavior, Professor Adrienne Davis, who's written an essay on historic and social movements for reparations. And we got a lot to talk about, as usual. I don't want to forget, you said to remind you to circle back to Evanston, so I'm circling back to Evanston.
Thank you. So usually when we think about reparations, people usually think about cash, and I think it's important. So, with reparations, a key piece of it is that when you call something reparations, typically there is an atonement that comes along with it. The institution or the organization that is giving the reparations, offering reparations, is atoning for something. Usually they're naming it. They're saying, I did something wrong. Typically it's accompanied by an apology, right? And then there's an atonement, this sense of atonement, which I think really resonates with folks a lot. And so what I want to make clear is that I think that there have been some powerful reparations that are non-monetary, including one that's out y'all's way. I don't know, how close are you to Pasadena?
Very close.
Okay. So did you follow the controversy over the Rose Bowl queen?
Yeah, I vaguely remember it, but refresh our memory.
Yeah, so in 1958, Joan Williams was named the Rose Bowl queen, and then they found out that she was African American. She was obviously very light-skinned African American, so they thought she was white. And they found out she was African American. They said, "Oh no, we can't have a black Rose Bowl queen." So they wouldn't. They overturned it. They wouldn't let her ride in the float as the Rose Bowl queen, right? So I think it was like 2015, the Rose Bowl Corporation acknowledged that, and they said this was wrong. This was racist. This was reinforcing white supremacy. So in atonement, they had Joan Williams ride in the lead float that year for the Rose Bowl. So, no money changed hands, but this is, I thought, a very powerful example of symbolic reparations. And part of the reason I want to highlight it, Dominique, is this is exactly the kind of thing that the current administration is trying to shut down, right? Yeah. They don't want anything that calls attention to racism in the past or ongoing racism, which is why they're trying to wipe off of all the websites, scrub Jackie Robinson, scrub Colin Powell, scrub all of the first, because if you highlight Black people who were the first to accomplish something, what you're also doing is you're highlighting all of the exclusion and subordination that came before the breakthrough, right?
Yeah.
So that's part of that scrubbing. So I think we're seeing some really interesting instances of symbolic reparations that I think are very powerful because, again, it calls attention to the exclusion and the injury that happened before. And it also reminds us, because so often, Black folks, especially, Black elite people get fixated on, well, the courts are never going to give it to us. This didn't come from the courts. No one sued. This was the Rose Bowl Corporation saying, we want to do this. The same with J.P. Morgan Chase. When they decided that they were going to, offer some compensation for some things, no one forced them to do that. When the nuns, I think it was, I can't remember if it was the Nuns of Sacred Heart, but when they decided to give scholarships to make up for years of exclusion, no one made them do that. So I think it's important that we not limit this to just, it has to come from some legal entity. Georgetown University, the same. They decide to do it. So, we have a long tradition, actually, dating back to the military, dating back to General Sherman, from the Civil War. People remember General Sherman's March to the Sea, which we teach children. I hope we also teach children about General Sherman's field order, where, having spent so much time with Black folks, right? And Black historians have written beautifully about this, how, many Black men, formerly enslaved men ran away, joined the Union Army and fought bravely, it was, beautifully told in the movie Glory, but also Black women and children also left those plantations and attached themselves to the Union Army. And they just say, we're not going back. And so, a lot of the military officers came to have a kind of grudging respect for those Black folks. And at the end of the war, they said, you know what? We're turning some of this land over to these Black folks, right? And they distributed, hundreds and thousands of acres of land, which President Andrew Johnson overturned. So we forget reparations did actually happen, and it was at the behest of the U.S. military, right? Who just saw the injustice and wanted to make it right. So when we say it'll never happen, it did happen.
And
then it was overturned.
And then it was revoked. Okay, we've got Fahima on the phone calling us from Washington, D.C. Good morning.
Yes, greetings, Dominique Baraka and Pasa, and greeting to your guests. I'm looking forward to reading your article, Professor. But just a couple of things really quickly. You're absolutely correct that there has been a rise in reparations efforts, and that's due to a number of reasons. I think this had a lot to do with the racial reckoning in terms of many of the organizations that have gotten involved, and there's some other efforts as well. But the statement that you made about Black elite getting involved, I don't see it. I know that there are some that in the academy that may write about it, but I don't see any of them, because I'm just saying, like an Oprah Winfrey or Magic Johnson, they're doing their thing. I don't see elites outside of the academy addressing that. So could you give an example of Black elites that have gotten involved with reparations? Because I don't see it.
Well, Ambassador Michael Lawson leads our reparations commission here in LA. That's an example I'd give.
Yeah. I mean, I understand her name was Fatima?
Fahima.
Fahima. My apologies, Fahima. And she's in my old stomping grounds. And Fahima, I don't know if you know Ajwa Ayatoro, who was the president of the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, and she's my co-author on that essay. I should give her a shout out. She's still back out in D.C. You're absolutely right. When you look at Black celebrity, you look at Black celebrity, Black sports. Overwhelmingly, you're not finding Black celebrities calling for Black reparations. There are some who are, right, but overwhelmingly, you're not seeing that. But I think what I meant to say is that in terms of a lot of the institutions that are studying it and looking at it, you will find Black professionals as part of those commissions or task forces or studies or what have you. And some of us are in the academy, but many of them are doctors and lawyers, right? Because it's now seen, when J.P. Morgan Chase calls and says, hey, we're thinking about redistributing money, that is a very attractive invitation to a lot of Black professionals, right? So I do see more and more of the Black elite. But you're right. And it's, if we had more people, like if we take sort of Colin Kaepernick, right, as an example, right, someone who really put his career on the line, not to call for reparations, but to call for racial justice in his own voice, right? You're absolutely right. We're not seeing Black celebrity calling for reparations in that way. I think she's right about that.
She also said in the chat that there was a huge backlash to students paying for the reparations, and the university ended up creating an endowment in reference to Georgetown. And I know that, they really have taken the lead. When we talk about reparations in various arenas, this is always a debate or a conversation. Should reparations be city? Should it be state? Should it be federal? Should it be academic, private industry, or all of the above?
All of the above. The answer is letter E, all of the above, all of the above. So let me go back to Evanston, because I distracted myself by talking about the symbolic realm, which I think is really important. And we're seeing how important the symbolic realm is now because President Trump is trying to erase it. He is trying to systematically remove Black history from, as you point out, museums, federal websites, Arlington Cemetery. They are trying to systematically, just take down and eliminate Black history. So we see the power of symbolism there. So Evanston was the first municipality to not just study, but actually implement Black reparations. And it's still new, so I don't know that we really can assess the impact. And there certainly have been some criticisms, but they had a pretty quick study that they did, and they decided to focus on housing because they felt that they could draw, a clear line between what their municipality had done between, I think they said like 1919 and 1919 and maybe 1969 in terms of systematically excluding Black folks from housing opportunities in a variety of ways. So they said, we're going to focus there as opposed to, education or employment. And they said, any Black resident of Evanston who can show that you lived there between that 50-year period would be entitled to, I want to say it was $25,000, but don't quote me on that. And you could use it. Initially, they were limiting it to housing, and they said you could use it to buy a house, for mortgage assistance, so presumably for refinancing or for home improvement. And then ultimately, there were Black folks who said, look, we were injured during that time period, but we're not buying homes. So then they expanded it to also be cash assistance as well. And I think they've distributed now probably, at least $500,000. It's funded by their cannabis tax, by the way.
Yeah. And that's also faced legal challenges.
It has. Not surprisingly, they're being sued in a class action for being racially exclusive. Absolutely.
And so, do you think that the outcome of that has broad implications, or do you think it would be narrowed to that specific program?
The lawsuit, you mean, or just I think what they are showing is that this is feasible, right? People say, how does it work? You can't do this. They stood up in a pretty short period of time, something that I think is fairly high impact. $25,000 in the context of housing. Typically you can do a lot with that in terms of refinancing, or for many folks, that's going to be enough for a down payment, right? If you're able, that'll get you into, a $250,000 house or unit or condo or something like that for people who are struggling. So I think I think it's meaningful. So I think it's a template for how to do this. Another common form of reparations that some institutions are standing up is access, right? So that's part of what Georgetown is doing, and other schools in the state of Virginia. I want to say did this by setting aside scholarships for folks. So scholarships to me are about access. It's about giving people access to institutions from which they were previously excluded. I'd love to see, on the education sphere, I'd love to see, $1 billion investment in the UNCF, what we used to call the United Negro College Fund. Now I think they go by UNCF. I'd love to see $1 billion investment there, right? Because that is what they do, is they help give Black students access to college, right?
Yeah, well, we can go deeper on that. We have Assemblyman Isaac Bryan here in the state of California has proposed a bill that would give descendants of enslaved persons in this country priority for university admissions. Some folks, I think it's solid. I think it could possibly test this whole idea of lineage as a legal model, but some folks see that as affirmative action. And that's, I imagine, what they hear when they hear scholarships or UNCF. How do you define the difference?
I think that it's a great question. So I think frequently reparations, again, accompanying reparations frequently is that acknowledgement, the apology, and the atonement. And that's important, because so often you'll hear people say, like, well, here's just a check, but I'm not saying I did anything wrong, right? And, part of what we're trying to do here is really take down racial supremacy, and you can't do that if people don't acknowledge it, right? So I think that, part of what makes me, when I'm trying to scrutinize things and say, is this civil rights or is this reparations? Both of which are good. I support both of those, But to me, for it to be reparations, typically I'm looking for some kind of a public acknowledgement, apology, and atonement that accompanies whatever the initiative is that is happening. I would say that if institutions if all that they're doing is, saying we are going to stop being racist and we're going to start admitting Black students, I don't see that as reparations. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I think that part of what makes it reparations is when these scholarships are set aside, right? And the scholarships are set aside specifically because to repair and atone for past injustice. To me, that's what bumps it over the line into reparations.
We're talking with Professor Adrienne Davis. It's a Friedman Friday. We are unapologetically reparationist. KBLA Talk 1580.
More of First Things First with Dominique DiPrima when we come forward.
Are you having trouble hearing? Hearing loss can devastate the quality of your life. Now, there's an affordable fix for you or your loved one. Rated in the best hearing aids of 2024 by USA Today, Audion Hearing has the highest quality hearing aids at the lowest prices, just $189.
I actually like them better than my old $5,000 hearing aids.
I could not believe how my hearing and life changed.
Join over 500,000 happy customers by going to audionhearing.com. That's AUDIEN hearing.com.
Oh no, stomach issues again?
Stomach issues? Who are you? Your pancreas. I could be the real reason for your diarrhea, gas, bloating, stomach pain, or loose oily stools.
I thought it was my stomach.
People often do, but any of these symptoms could mean having a condition called exocrine pancreatic insufficiency, or EPI. With EPI, the pancreas doesn't release enough enzymes to break down food, but EPI is manageable. Use the symptom checker on identifyepi.com and speak with your doctor. That's identifyepi.com. Sponsored by AbbVie.
I'm Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I learned about atrial fibrillation the hard way. My symptoms would come and go. Shortness of breath, fatigue. I kept going. Then I got so lightheaded, I couldn't. My doctor said I have AFib, so I'm about 5 times more likely to have a stroke. Other symptoms, irregular heartbeat, heart racing, chest pain can come and go, but the risk of stroke stays. If you have symptoms, tell a doctor. Visit notimetowait.com.
Sponsored by Bristol Myers Squibb and Pfizer. Wesley Financial Group is not a law firm.
Are you a victim of the timeshare trap and think there's no way out? I'm Chuck McDowell, founder of Wesley Financial Group, the original timeshare cancellation expert. And I'm here to tell you that there is a way out. All you need to do is give my office a call. I will send you a timeshare exit information kit absolutely free, explaining how the timeshare industry works and your options for cancellation.
Call Wesley now for your free info kit. Call 800-335-2299. That's 800-335-2299.
The California Crusader newspaper would like to thank all of our subscribers for their support throughout the years, proudly serving the South Los Angeles and South Bay areas for more than 40 years. The California Crusader is a multicultural, black-owned, adjudicated newspaper that focuses on providing newsworthy information to the people in our community. We're constantly looking for ways to assist businesses in our community to connect with our subscribers. We provide low-cost, effective ways to promote your business with our reasonable and affordable advertising rates. You can participate by suggesting, sharing, and submitting your stories on the California Crusader newspaper Community Share Facebook group page, or visit our website at cal-cruise-news.com. That's calcruisenews.com. Then click on the Submit Now button located on the top right corner of the homepage, or text CCN to 42828. Again, text CCN to 42828. The California Crusader newspaper, working together to build a better community for our future. Subscribe today.
This is KBLA Talk 1580, where hate loses and love wins.
And we are talking with Professor Adrienne Davis. So much to cover here in terms of reparations. You've got some pushback to our conversation in the chat, because I feel that folks, when they hear you talk about scholarships or symbolic reparatory moves, think that means that you're not in support of cash payments or land changing hands. And I think in California, we may be extra sensitive to that, because we got a whole apology and that's about it. An apology and a pat on the head.
Let me clarify. I support all the forms of reparations. Let me clarify. I support all of them. I just wanted to say that that in addition to the cash, I think institutions and organizations should be looking for opportunities to make symbolic repair as well, right? And that also can be very, very important, and that we see the importance of that because the administration is trying to completely eliminate and erase that right now. But yes, I completely support the Evanston housing program that's giving $25,000 to people. I completely support that. I think that's a model of reparations.
It's interesting when you started, because one of the demands of reparations activists on the ground here in California is a universal basic income for, descendants who are elders, who are, I guess, retirement age or whatever. And to me, that harkens back to what Callie House and others were talking about. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. And I need to look into that more, because I think that's a great example. And that is tied to the same logic that Callie House pointed out, which is that if people work their entire lives and don't have anything to show for it because of systemic racism, whether that systemic racism was enslavement, or today it would be, people, Black elders have worked their entire lives, but were working for, they were systematically underpaid. They may have been victims of various kinds of fraud. They weren't able to build generational wealth because they weren't able to access home loans. They were, their education was underfunded. I mean, all the things that leave Black elders, who were some of the hardest working generations of Americans, right? And leave them without the resources. So I think that's kind of that Callie House framework of let's compensate them. It's not charity, it's not welfare, it's reparations, it's reparative.
I also think it's interesting. Well, you know what? Let me go to Carl instead of my thing. Let me go to Carl from LA. Hi, Carl. You're on with Professor Adrienne Davis.
Hey, good morning to you, Dominique, and to your guests. Hey, I would love to go back to trade school myself. I mean, trade school over here called Trade Tech. I mean, city colleges. I mean,
give a little money to that. Bring it to reparations for me, Carl.
Oh, yeah, well, that's, you said something about universities are into the reparations. Reparations would help pay for going to college and stuff. But anyway, Joe Biden was in Angola with the Tucker family from Virginia. Does she know anything about how that turned out? Was that a good thing for reparations? Because that genealogy, I looked up into it, Dominique, and it's a good thing. The last time I was on your show, I didn't agree with it, but it seemed like it does bring people together. That it could happen.
I apologize. I did not follow that closely enough to be able to comment on that. I'll look into it.
Yeah, I can't say that I have a great answer for you on that either, Carl, but forthcoming, because, we do this every week at this time, and that's what we're here for, is try to unpack and understand as much as possible. I was going to ask you, Professor Davis, why it's important. We only have a couple minutes here, though, so you can do what you want with them. But you point out that there are so many different ideological thought groups and individuals within the reparations movement. And you seem to feel like it's important to acknowledge and understand that. Some folks think it's the downfall of the movement. Why do you think that's important?
Yeah, I think it is. Black folks are not monolithic, as we know. That's part of the beauty of being Black, right? But what we all agree on is Black freedom and Black liberation and Black justice. So there's some folks some of the founders of the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, in COBRA, some of the founders were Black nationalists, Chokwe Lumumba and Amari Obadeli, and part of what they were seeking was a Black homeland. Right. They wanted a separate Black nation state to be created within the United States. I don't think that's feasible. I do not see that. I'm not even going to get into whether I favor it or not. I just don't see that as something that is actually going to happen. Right. There are a lot of other things, though, like the scholarships or the housing program. J.P. Morgan, as I said, made some resources available that I think are more feasible, right? So I don't want to say reasonable, but I'll say feasible. So I think that the beauty is in understanding these different competing visions of what Black liberation looks like. Some people want, self-determination. They want a homeland, right? Other folks are like, no, we want is the full promise of citizenship. And we think that, having access to housing is going to be a part of that. I don't think that we have to, and I don't think that has been why the movement hasn't been successful. Like, I don't think that if all Black people had come together and asked for a single version of reparations, I still don't think we would have gotten it because, racism, right? But I do think that we are in a moment now of racial reckoning, which I think is probably kind of closing, right? With the Trump administration. It's a 5 years, 2020 to 2025. And I know I got to wrap up. So we had this 5 years of 2020 to 2025. And I think we would be well served to really look and see how far we were able to push reparations. I'll just give people two quick resources if they want to pursue it. Justin Hansford at Howard University has a terrific website, the U.S. African American Redress Network, and University of Massachusetts at Amherst has a website which lists all the reparations that have been given over the course of the United States dating back to the 1700s. So people who want to delve more deeply into it, I recommend those two resources, in addition to my article that I wrote with Azra Ayatoro.
Professor Adrienne Davis, thank you so much. News,
thank
traffic, and news, traffic, and sports. Then it's Grim Sleeper time on KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
I'm Bree Wood with 4 Things You Should Know with BIN News. At the 2025 Black Press Day in Washington, D.C., President and CEO Benjamin Chavez highlighted the Black press's role in advocating for freedom and equality. He called for adapting to new platforms while preserving print journalism's impact. The NYPD is searching for suspects who vandalized a Tesla with swastikas and the word Nazis in Brooklyn. The car's cameras captured the incident and police are investigating the hate crime. Tesla vehicles have been a target in a number of other states as well as of late. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is in the Philippines, where he reaffirmed the U.S.'s commitment to help defend against threats, including China. He met today with Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. as the pair stressed a commitment to peace in the region. And a new study from China links high-salt diets to depression-like behavior in mice, showing that excessive salt intake triggers immune responses in the brain, leading to depression-like symptoms. Get BIN News on demand 24/7 on the iHeartRadio app.
The Crohn's and Colitis Foundation has been at the forefront of inflammatory bowel disease research and care for over 50 years. Learn more about research, education, and support at Crohn's Colitis Foundation